Growth data is how we know whether our students are growing from year to year. Standardized testing shows a student's proficiency level, but it doesn't clearly outline whether they've grown as a learner. To answer the burning question about whether students are making adequate progress from year to year, we can use the Colorado Growth Model, which applies 4 indicators to demonstrate student growth. Median Growth Percentile, or MGP, shows how much a group of students is progressing compared to others. Typical growth for an individual student centers around 50. Lower means slower growth, higher means better than average.
So tell us, how is KCAA doing?
I'm glad you asked. First, let me say that growth is a meaningful indicator because it applies to all students at all grade levels. Academic growth is the category that's weighted most heavily in calculating KCAA's overall rating on the school performance framework. Here we can see that KCAA is showing typical growth in both reading and writing, but our students are growing a little more slowly in math compared to the rest of the students in the district.
How about in comparison to the rest of the state?
KCAA is a very small school with only about 95 students in grades 9 and 10. This data can't be disaggregated into subgroups since the state limits disaggregation when there are less than 20 students. Our demographic is 78% Hispanic and our free and reduced lunch population is 83%. So we can hypothesize that the MGP of our minority and economically challenged students averages about 55%. A quick visual reference to the SPF for KCAA's high school shows that we are closing in on achieving meets in all categories of the median growth percentile. A few more years of data will show, more accurately, whether the growth of our students is keeping pace with the expectations, moving us closer to an educational program that demonstrates success.
What about the other 3 indicators of growth?
You're right. There are 3 other indicators of academic growth that are used in addition to the MGP to determine a school's academic growth over time. Adequate growth percentile, or AGP, catching up, and finally keeping up. AGP is the growth that students needed on average in the past year to reach or maintain proficiency within 3 years, or by the 10th grade. With the AGP indicator, lower is better because it generally means that the school has better historical testing scores. Catching up is the indicator that demonstrates the percentage of students who previously scored below proficient but have shown enough growth in the past year to reach proficiency within 3 years or by the 10th grade. Finally, keeping up. This indicates the percentage of students who previously scored proficient and are on track to maintain that level over 3 years or through the 10th grade.
Well, what are KCAA's AGP catching and keeping up indicators showing?
Well, we're playing a bit of a waiting game with these 3 indicators. Because there's no historical testing data for KCAA's high school, there's really no AGP or keeping up information to analyze. This will be an area that we look closely at once TCAP results are in late August. One area where we do have a little bit of data is for how many students are on track to catching up. This graph indicates that 48% of our students have shown enough growth in reading to reach proficiency in 3 years or by 10th grade, 29% in writing, and 3% in math. We're excited about our reading scores, but we do realize we have a ways to go with writing, and we'll be very focused on math as well. There are multiple measures used on a school's performance framework. In this next section, we'll be looking at achievement data. Academic achievement is a snapshot of how well students performed on state tests and on some district benchmarks. This measure is the category that gives a school a rating based on the percentage of students who scored at or above grade level on state assessments.
Are students at KCAA achieving?
You sound a little bit nervous asking that question. I don't blame you. Academic achievement is definitely harder to demonstrate than growth. So we're going to start with our strengths. KCAA is showing growth in a few areas: writing, social studies, and earth science. You can see below that in the 2012-13 school year, students grew in all of these areas in the benchmark assessments. Let's analyze how kids actually did on those interim tests. At the beginning of the school year, 43% of the students were proficient or better in the Introduction to Literature writing portion of the assessment. This benchmark data indicates that 53% of 9th grade students were proficient on the Intro to Lit writing benchmark at the end of the year. That's about 23% growth to proficiency. Another example of achievement is in our American Literature Writing Benchmark Assessment. At the beginning of the year, only 22% of students were proficient or better. This benchmark data indicates that 54% of 10th grade students were proficient on that American Lit Writing benchmark at the end of the school year. We're getting there. This next example demonstrates the kind of growth we'd like to see in all core content areas at KCAA. At the beginning of the school year, only 14% of students in geography were proficient or better. This benchmark data indicates that 71% of students were proficient or better on the geography benchmark final at the end of the school year. Outstanding growth and strong achievement. Let's start addressing some of our weaker areas. At the beginning of the school year, 0% of students were proficient on the Earth Science benchmark. You can see here that the final data reports 25% of students were proficient on that year-end benchmark. This definitely demonstrates growth, but we'd also like to see stronger academic achievement. While we really like the growth that we saw in Earth Science, we now need to look at the areas where KCAA is showing the least amount of growth and achievement: math and other sciences. Let's continue our discussion with a focus on biology. At the start of the school year, 25% of students were scoring proficient or better, and by the end of the year, they ended with similar scores. The primary difference was that we're seeing more unsatisfactory scores in the spring than we did in the fall. This isn't growth, and it definitely is an achievement. The current area of concern, though, is in math. At the start of the school year, 34% of students were proficient or better in algebra. This benchmark data indicates that student scores fell dramatically, with only 7% of students scoring in the proficient range at the end of the school year. Student scores went from 66% in the unsatisfactory to partially proficient range in the fall to a whopping 93% unsat or partially proficient in the spring. At the start of the school year in geometry, only 15% of students were proficient or better. This benchmark data indicates that 16% of students were proficient on the geometry benchmark at the end of the school year, and that scores in the unsatisfactory range went from 65% to 71% at the end of the year. There's no real growth here and very little demonstrated achievement.
So they're not achieving then?
Well, we believe our kids can do better. What this data tells us is that our students aren't getting math, and that they're also not achieving in science at the academic level necessary. It's clear that intentional interventions must be done in these areas to arrest the situation and to ensure that our students graduate with the math and science competencies that they will need for college and career. When we compare the district benchmarks to TCAP, we can see that these tests are entirely accurate in predicting student achievement in math and science on the state standardized tests. We need to begin using these predictors to help guide us as we complete those interventions I talked about earlier. We want our kids to do better, and we know that they can achieve.
How do you know that for sure?
In addition to a simple outline of the academic achievement on TCAP for KCAA high school students, you'll see a chart and information demonstrating that strong academic achievement at KCAA is possible. Students enrolled in the KCAA CTE Digital Design Department, of which there are about 70 kids in total, piloted the Spring Arts Assessment and scored, on average, better than any other students of the same level of instruction in the arts across the district. Now, some might argue or assume that the Visual Arts Assessment is not a valuable or valid assessment of a student's overall competencies. However, this assessment had more short constructed response, academic language and vocabulary questions than any other non-tested subject that was piloted this year. It also contained as many short constructed response questions as the Spring Intro to Lit course assessment. What we know for sure is that student achievement is impacted by student engagement. When assessments are given in areas where students regularly apply authentic tasks and incorporate the practical application of skill-based learning, they are able to demonstrate achievement at a very high level.
I've learned a lot so far. What are some other data points that speak to KCAA's performance?
Great question. There are a few other areas where we can gather data that speak to a school's performance. Post-secondary readiness, student engagement, parent engagement. We can include discipline data and the perception of all stakeholders, including the community, local businesses, the staff, the people who generally make up the neighborhood area. Let's continue this conversation with a discussion about post-secondary readiness. Post-secondary readiness includes valuable data about how a student performs in a variety of areas around preparation for college and career. Specifically, we'd be talking about advanced placement courses, articulation, credit recovery programs, and how many students are on track to graduate. There's no cumulative data available for KCAA since the high school program isn't even entirely built out. 2012-13 was the first year that KCAA offered AP classes or any credit recovery options. Once this data is in, we'll have more information to share. What we do know is that about 75% of our students in the high school are on track for graduation, and that in the coming year, concurrent enrollment will be offered as a pathway for the Ascent program. We're excited to announce that every 11th grader in our program will be concurrently enrolled next year.
Can you tell me more about student engagement and satisfaction?
Sure. Student engagement and satisfaction is determined through attendance, surveys, and to some degree behavior. This is another place where we get points on that school performance framework. Overall, KCAA high school students are very satisfied, with an overall rating of 92% on the school performance framework. Let's really spend some time examining those categories in depth. In the category of learning, 87% of KCAA high school students agree or strongly agree that learning at KCAA is valuable, productive, and supported by the teachers and staff. In the category of safety and support, 83% of our students feel an overall sense of safety, trust, and support in their learning environment at KCAA and at home as it relates to their learning. In the category of college and career readiness, 96% of students believe that KCAA is doing a great job at preparing them for post-secondary learning and also for a career. In the category of attendance, KCAA is almost unbeatable and boasts the highest attendance rate in the West Denver network and one of the highest overall in DPS, with 93.3% for the 2012-13 school year. In the category of behavior, KCAA also scores very well. Behavioral incidents in the high school are generally very low level, falling into the type 1 category on that DPS behavioral matrix. In 2012, KCAA only had 11 unique behavioral events, with only 2% of its students receiving out-of-school suspension. Only 8% of the student population was involved in any type of behavioral incident. We're also incredibly proud of our enrichment data points. KCAA offers no fewer than 15 clubs, classes, academic enrichment, or committee opportunities to students throughout the year. The average enrollment in these enrichment activities is about 10 students. 50% of KCAA high school students arrive early or stay late to participate at least once a week in a variety of enrichment activities that range from hip-hop class to academic tutoring to student leadership, fashion design club, even community service. We understand that we have some work to do in academic growth and achievement, but we're exceptionally proud of our attendance rates, our low level of behavioral incidents, and our enrichment opportunities.
Your data shows that KCAA is a great place for students, but how do their parents and the community feel?
We really think of our parents and the community as stakeholders in our success, and their satisfaction truly does count. Overall, parent satisfaction for KCAA's high school was at 81% last year. Let's analyze the top 5 areas that had the highest and the lowest ratings on the parent survey. We received our highest ratings in the area of parent and student engagement and also in how parents feel we're growing their children as learners. 96% of families believe that KCAA encourages parents to be involved in their child's education and that the school environment supports learning. 89% of families believe that their child has shown growth in reading, math, and science. That's exciting news. Our lowest ratings came in the equitable treatment of students, communication, and how the school responds to bullying. In most of the categories where we received our lower rankings, we had a fair number of parents who either didn't respond to the question or responded that they were unsure. None of our lowest ratings fell below 50% in any category. But we will be looking closely at all of the ratings to improve our overall performance for parents, students, and the community at large.
Thanks for sharing this data about KCAA.
You're welcome.